I'm Scott Lucas. This is today's EAWorldView on Syria, a beginner's guide to the Islamic State, the Insurgency, and the Assad Regime. A very good friend of mine spoke with me earlier this week and said, I'm confused. I thought the Insurgency were the good guys in Syria, but I'm hearing that these British fighters who are going out there, who are now involved in executions and beheadings, they're with the Islamic State. And the Islamic State don't seem to be very good guys at all. So, what is the Syrian insurgency? Who are the Islamic State? And what exactly is going on in the country? I don't think my friend is alone. I think many people who are well-read, who are really interested in what is happening in Syria, are now at the point of total confusion as to what has happened in this conflict, seeing tragic, graphic, disturbing images, but not being able to put together what is the state of the fight, the opposition against President Assad after 41 months. So here's a bit of a reminder with a beginner's guide. Point 1, who are the Islamic State? The Islamic State started in Iraq in 2004, fighting the American occupation. They became involved in Syria in 2013 when their fighters crossed the border and sometimes fought the Assad regime alongside insurgents, at other times carried out their own operations. But most importantly, what the Islamic State was doing was not part of a dedicated opposition to the Assad regime. They were trying to carve out their own position, establish their own power, take over cities. For example, they split with another group, Jabhat al-Nusra, which was a group linked to Al-Qaeda, because they said they wanted to control the insurgency. So whereas Jabhat al-Nusra continued to work with the insurgency to fight Assad, the Islamic State went a different way. And then in January, the Islamic State, which was now beginning to assassinate members of the insurgency, declared open war on them. Across the north and the east of Syria, they fought other insurgent groups across the spectrum of the Free Army, the Islamic Front, Jabhat al-Nusra, trying to, in a sense, win that battle as opposed to trying to defeat Assad. And to a great extent, the Islamic State has been successful. They control Raqqa, for example, in northern Syria, the largest city outside regime control. They control most of the eastern part of Syria, Deir ez-Zor and Azaka provinces. They control most of Syria's oil fields, and they have overrun its largest gas field. But they are not, to repeat, they are not the insurgency. Point 2. So who are the insurgency then? The insurgency, which is a collection of different groups with different philosophies, sometimes different objectives, now are united by the fact that they are fighting both the Islamic State and the Assad regime. So, for example, near Damascus, in the south of Syria, in Hama, near Homs, they are fighting President Assad's troops. But in the north, in Aleppo province, they are not only fighting Assad for control of Syria's largest city, they also now find themselves fighting the Islamic State. In other words, they are caught between two different foes. And indeed, they had to evacuate eastern Syria earlier this year because they got ground up in a pincer movement between the jihadists and the Assad forces. But point 3, who then are the Assad regime? Or to be more precise, where is it positioned between the Islamic State and the insurgency? Up until June this year, the Assad regime was effectively allied with the Islamic State, not in an open alliance, but in the fact that both of them saw the insurgency as the main threat. Go back between January and June of this year and see if you can find any reference to an attack by the Syrian regime on a position of the Islamic State. You probably won't. See if you can find any record of an attack by the Islamic State on a Syrian military position. You probably won't. Without declaring it openly, without signing any piece of paper, the Islamic State and President Assad's men each recognized that it was best to leave the other side alone while they tried to weaken the insurgency for their different interest. Now, since June, that position has changed. The Islamic State, because it has become much stronger in Iraq with its successes there, had the confidence that it could now move against the Assad regime. It took over a series of military bases, especially in the north of the country. It overran the largest gas field in Syria. It now began to assert the fact that it could defeat both the insurgents and Damascus. In other words, point 4, we have a three-way fight. We have a fight of the insurgents, to whom many opposition groups are linked, who are still dedicated to the fact that President Assad must go. But now it is no longer the insurgency versus Assad. It is the Islamic State, who for their own purposes, a so-called caliphate which crosses between Iraq and Syria, are fighting both the insurgents and Assad. So why haven't we heard that much about this? Why didn't we know about the Islamic State's de facto alliance with Assad? Or about the Islamic State's not alliance with the insurgency, but battles with it? Well, that's because it's the latest story that takes over. The Islamic State in June took over Iraq's second largest city, Mosul, and began to advance on Baghdad, taking other cities on the way. All of a sudden, the world recognized now that the Islamic State was not, quote, just insurgents, but a group which crossed borders, that was trying to establish its position in two countries. That both complicates the story, but it makes it clearer. If you're going to resolve the situation in Syria, you not only have to deal with the Assad regime, you have to deal with the Islamic State. Both of them have to be overcome in some way. And that is why, when you say, well, what exactly is a Syrian insurgency? What you're saying is, can you support a Syrian opposition who, for the sake not only of rights and justice, but also stability, can be bolstered to take on both Damascus and the jihadists? I'm Scott Lucas. This has been today's EA Worldview on Syria.